I guess we're all thinking about the same thing today, because what I want to talk about is duality. 2 is a very important number. And one of the reasons it's very important is this is how many lives we have. We've talked about this a number of times today. We've got this aspirational, magical life, which seems like something we'll just sort of grow into someday. And then we have the life that we actually lead after we've hit the snooze a number of times. The person that I, in my aspirational life, am is very informed. I know stuff about politics. This is nothing I know now, I promise you that. But I have my finger on the pulse of current events in my aspirational life. And so to prepare for this day when I finally do sort of just grow up to be this person, I have a number of subscriptions to news sources, which really means I have a number of subscriptions to piles of paper in my apartment that I just feel too guilty to throw away, but I don't have time to read. I do, however, seem to have time to monitor just the heck out of any service that may show me baby hedgehogs. Which brings up this question of why is it I truly, truly believe that I don't have the time to do something that I say I want to do, that I want to accept a change, and I want to be a different person. I truly believe I don't have enough time to do that. Yet I do have the resources to scour the web for adorable animal photos. And I keep saying that I want to do something, and I truly on some level believe that I want to do it, but I just don't do it. And I think that's an important question that we're all going to be asking ourselves when we leave today with the very best intentions, and then in a couple of weeks sort of monitor how am I doing on that. And the reason that there is this dichotomy, which I want to talk about, is that the brain itself, it operates much more as a committee than we really give it credit for. There's only one part of the brain which really talks. We have one verbal part. This is the part that we think of as being ourselves, if we think of ourselves residing in our brain at all. And then we have a whole number of subsystems which are totally nonverbal and thus pretty obscure. And yet in this committee, these subsystems do have voting rights, and they have veto rights. I'm going to show you what this looks like to have 2 systems running opposite each other. This is called the Stroop effect, and it involves a little bit of audience participation. The task I want you to do with me right now is I want you to read the color of the letters on the screen. Don't read the word. I gave away the ending. It's still going to be hard to do. All right? So just read with me, report back the color. Green. Green. Red. White. Purple. Yellow. Blue. White. Red. Green. So that's hard. We could hear that. We could hear the rhythm slow down as the 2 pieces of data that were being fed into our mind, the shape of the word, which we recognize immediately. We don't need to read words as individual letters. We start to recognize shapes. That part of the brain is running directly against the part of the brain which recognizes colors. It slowed a lot of people down, slowed everybody down. I practice, it still slowed me down. And there's a lot more inaccuracy there. And so the brain, when it has competing inputs, and the committee is voting, and it doesn't have a consensus, the easiest thing to do is slow down, allow mistakes, or stop. This is what this looks like on a neuroanatomical basis. This is a very complicated image. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It's the same brain of somebody doing this Stroop task. It's from a number of different points of view. And I just want to point out that every arrow on this slide points to a little different island of activity. These are all different little subsystems that are running. Some of them are doing the same thing, and some of them are working opposite each other. What's interesting about this pattern of islands of activity is it's very similar to what we see with people who are in a moral quandary. The brains of people in a moral quandary also have this island-like activity, where there's some part which is for and some part which is against. And this has been studied extensively by Joshua Green, who is, I suppose, a nice enough man. And what he does is he takes a very well-intentioned undergraduate who's already agreed to stick her head in an MRI tube, and then tortures her with moral quandaries. So this is an example. Imagine that you are the only spectator to what in a moment is going to be a fatal trolley crash. There's a bunch of people and the brakes don't work. You are too small and you are too far away to stop the train, but there is another person who is completely oblivious, who is a large man right next to you. He's also the perfect trolley stopping size. Would you put your hands on this spectator and push him in front of the trolley to stop it? He won't survive, but the people on the trolley will. So this is what your brain looks like when you have to think about something horrible like that. There's two major islands. There's the one which is up at the top, and that's the prefrontal cortex. This is the planning part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that runs numbers, and it is also verbal. And it's thinking right now, and it's thinking, oh, considering my schedule next week, one funeral is going to be a lot easier to attend than 15. Because the prefrontal cortex is a little sociopathic. This is also the part of the brain which remembers to clip coupons so I can subscribe to more international newspapers. There's one other island of activity, which is sort of like the middle child of the brain. And this is the ventral anterior cingulate cortex. And it goes off whenever there's conflict, when it knows that there is an impulse and an action and they don't line up. And when they don't line up, it goes off, it lights up like Rudolph the neurotic reindeer. And this is the part of my brain which mourns every time I sit down and I do actual work instead of going to zooborns.com. And this is an entirely nonverbal part of my brain. Well, it's a nonverbal part of everybody's brain. But it's a part of the brain that we don't really think of and actually work very hard to ignore. This is, because I also hate to use the word, part of what we think of as being our heart. It also has voting rights, and it would just prefer to stop anything which has emotional connotations so that it doesn't have to work so hard. So before you start feeling really bad for the prefrontal cortex, because apparently that's where aspirational life lives, if only the rest of that emotional part wasn't dragging it down, I also want to explain a little bit more, not give an oversimplified statement, that the prefrontal cortex, as part of the verbal part of the brain, is also the part of the brain which maintains this narrative of our lives and maintains the fictions of hard work and the fictions of doing the things you don't like so that in order to have this payoff of something that you do like, and it is the only part of the brain which lies. We learn a lot about normal physiology by looking at people who, unfortunately, are a patient population that have some sort of disorder. And what is interesting is that alcoholics have terrible memories. Okay, maybe that's not really interesting because they black out. But beyond the blacking out, one of the obvious signposts of having terrible alcoholism is that the metabolic demands of processing that much alcohol also causes brain damage. And after a while, they cannot form new memories, whether they are drinking or not. And what their prefrontal cortex and the verbal part of their brain does as a network is it makes stuff up. And this is called confabulation. This is an actual symptom of people with brain damage because the brain hates blank tape. It is not going to admit it doesn't know. It will say that it lives on the far side of the moon. It will say that it grew up in Gracie Mansion. It will come up with a variety of things which are obviously not true to a bystander, but the individual who is confabulating does truly believe it. The non-pathological side of this is rationalization, because that's just sort of a spectrum. Another patient population that we understand more about the fibbing potential of the brain from are individuals who have split brains. And so some individuals with potentially fatal epilepsy will choose to have portions of the brain segregated away, and that will be an attempt to confine the seizures. And the verbal and the nonverbal part of the brains can no longer talk to each other. This is one of the side effects. Fortunately, they have the same personality they did at the beginning. They have the same intelligence they did at the beginning. Just the brain adapts around it. But the two sections can't directly communicate. However, clinicians can communicate to the two different sections independently. And so this is an experiment done in these individuals where the nonverbal part of the brain, which can communicate through nonverbal means, either through pictures or by selecting items that are available to it, is shown something like a snowman. And the task that it does is it'll pick an item which is an appropriate matching task. This is very simple. And so then it picks something like a snow shovel, because that's obvious. Then the verbal part of the brain is shown something completely irrelevant, like a chicken. It's then also informed that it had previously picked a snow shovel. And then that snow shovel was the most appropriate item for this chicken. And it goes, well, obviously, it's for cleaning out the chicken coop. So why am I perpetuating all this slander about the verbal part of our brains? I didn't just come here to be mean. I came here because I really want you guys to develop the tools to assay how well is this going. For all the changes that we are interested in adopting, I really want you to think, is this going well? Instead of relying on this internal narrative of the verbal part of the brain, which just makes stuff up. Because we can always tell ourselves, I'll get up and go to the gym tomorrow. We can always tell ourselves, I'll start another company once I've made enough money working as a financial analyst. The verbal part of our brain doesn't always help. What it does sometimes, hopefully, is it gives us what clinicians call symptoms. We have two different ways of diagnosing, symptoms and signs. This is two types of information. Symptoms are anything that the client tells us. This is what is bothering them. And it's good because it brings them in. But it's not always very helpful information. The really helpful information is signs. These are things which are not self-reported and they're not verbal. But they are measurable and they are quantifiable. It's the other way. I use intentionally the image here of glasses for optometry because the signs and symptoms dichotomy is important in optometry. A friend of mine who was getting her degree took an entire semester of cancer biology, which seemed sort of irrelevant until she explained that people who have headaches will come in and say, I need new glasses. Because healthy, normal, not hypochondriac people don't say, I have headaches, I may have a brain tumor. So they go to their eye doctor. That feels safe. That feels like it fits into their narrative of this is what you do every year. You get new glasses. And yet, by using signs, the clinician is able to find what is really the problem and fix the correct problem, not just fix the easiest problem. And using the signs of intraocular pressure and protruding optic discs in a good-sized optometry practice, they'll find about one brain tumor a month. And I'm not saying this to make people really upset every time their head twinges. That's really not what I want to do this in service of. What I want to do this in service of is to encourage you to start using measurable, quantifiable signs in your life, not just symptoms. I want you to start looking at, is your schedule over full because you have status meetings with every person you employ and you're so busy breathing down their neck you can't trust them? Or are you the only thing you own are sweatpants because you live entirely within your comfort zone and you haven't learned anything in years? Or does your to-do list have a number of things which just get transferred week after week after week because you're not doing them? Even if the verbal part of your brain says, oh yeah, I'm going to do that, I'm just going to do it later. Working within the constraints of the conflict, the heart, and the mind, and making sure that they pull in the same direction, much like the axles of a four-wheel drive need to be going in the same direction for there to be any forward movement, that may seem constrictive. That may seem like you're not exercising as many options as you have. But as one of our speakers put much better, and I don't need to elaborate, that compensating for known quantities allows you a tremendous amount of creativity. And this is shown a whole bunch in photography, it's shown in literature, poetry. Poetry has very often a form. Haiku is probably the most constrictive of the forms. It's very short and it's very demanding. And yet, a well-crafted haiku has so much more emotional impact and quality than just any 17 syllables in a row. This is inspiring for the sort of solutions that you can make by trying to pull together the verbal part of the brain and the nonverbal part of the brain. And that the solutions you'll have will work for you, and they will be much more effective than something that you could just pick up in the $10 billion self-help industry, which may be a one-size-fits-all. So today we're all going to go home, and we're all going to be very excited about doing things differently. And I really want everybody here to be successful. So the one thing I really want to leave you with, you can tell I'm very emphatic because I'm saying really a lot. I want you to have this toolkit for knowing what direction you're going in and how well are you engaged in doing it. And I want you to focus on signs, not just symptoms. And I want you to listen to these quiet parts of your brain which are letting you know which direction you're going in. Thank you.